before we finish. So I can see Fiona's ready and waiting, so I'll hand over to her now.
Thank you. Thanks very much, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak as well. It's great to be back, even if virtually rather than in person. I'm going to hopefully have my slides shared in a minute, and I'll talk through what we're going to look at in the next hour or so. And as Mr. Teague has said, I've planned in a little bit of time at the end for some questions. So please do, if you've got any questions, put those in. I've got a little bit of time at the end, as long as I don't talk too long, but I will also, I can answer any questions, and I can also carry on talking if there aren't any questions there as well. So fantastic, lovely, thank you. So I'm not sure how I work my way through these if I'm not sharing it myself. Sorry, could you move on to the next slide for me? Thank you. Okay, can I talk through the objectives? So we're going to find out more about, the slides are all animated, I'm really sorry, what young people and parents need to know about the risks of drugs and alcohol. We're going to think about the factors that affect young people's decisions about drugs and alcohol, because it's really important. It's not just what you know, but it's what you do with what you know, and it's the hardest time of your life to make safe, sensible decisions about anything for reasons that we'll look at. We're going to look at some practical strategies, things that you and they put in place to help them stay safe, and also where you can go for more information and support too. But I was going to start by telling you a little bit of a story, and it's the story of Dan. Oh, somebody can't hear me. So sorry, I'll speak a bit louder. Is it not, you can't hear me at all, or the sound's very bad? I don't know. I'll try and talk a little bit louder. This is, if the person doing the video, Alec, if you could just press it again, it'll just put some pictures through. Thank you. Okay, this is my son Dan. So we had two boys, Jacob and Daniel. Dan was a couple of years younger than Jacob, and we live in Croydon. The boys went to school, they were at Archbishop Tennyson, or local people, so that will mean something to you. And Dan, unfortunately, as you know, he died taking MDMA. He was 16, and he was really just the very last person that would have been on anybody's radar to come to harm from drugs. He, in those stereotypes that we can have in our heads, he was bright, funny, kind, incredibly popular, prom king at the end of year 11, which is basically a popularity test. Everybody liked Dan. You couldn't help yourself. He was just very, very good at making friends with absolutely everybody, every friendship group. He'd got a lovely girlfriend, Jenna, he'd been going out with for more than 2 years when he died. What happened was that he'd gone into sixth form, he'd gone into year 12, was doing really, really well, best ever parents' evening in that November. Been in the school show just before Christmas. They were doing the whiz, he was in the band, signed up as a bone marrow donor. You know, he was in a really good place. They got to January, they'd been back at school a couple of weeks, got in on a Friday and asked if it was okay to go to a party. So I asked all those mum questions, you know, where's it going to be and who's going to be there and when's it going to finish? And there were things about it that were unusual. So it was going to be in Clapham, which isn't a million miles away from Croydon, as you know, but he hadn't been to a party quite that far away before. It was going to finish very late. But there was a whole story around this party. There were going to be 15 of them travelling from Croydon to Clapham. We checked there were going to be trains and buses coming back that late in the morning. It was early hours, that late at night. But there were going to be, that he got enough money on his travel card and everything. But unfortunately, it wasn't a rave. It wasn't a party. It was an illegal rave. Sorry. It was a bunch of boys, mostly from another school, and it was a boy who joined the school for sixth form. They're friends of his who'd been at this rave, who'd got this plan to go to this rave and who'd got a plan to take MDMA. And unfortunately, Dan had said that he would be in. So one of the boys had called his dealer, arranged a drop off. They pulled their money. He went off with a couple of friends, brought it back and shared it out. They then took a long time to get all the way across London to where this rave was. It was in Hayes and Hillingdon. And there's such a lot of faffing around on the way to an illegal event because the organisers don't release the final venue till really late. And Dan's friend Jack said all the way there, Dan was holding on to his MDMA. The other 4 boys, they'd all dissolved it in water, little bags of white crystal. They all dissolved it in water, and the other 4 boys were sipping theirs all the way there. And Jack said he could see that Dan was just looking a bit kind of uncomfortable and holding his back. And he said he wanted to say, look, Dan, if you don't want to do this, you don't have to do it. But he thought, if I say anything, it's just going to draw attention to the fact that everyone else has and Dan hasn't, and maybe make it harder to sneak it away. So he didn't say anything. And apparently what happened was, on that very, very last train, somebody else spotted that Dan hadn't had it and just said, are you not having that then? And at that point, Dan could just as easily have said, no, I'm fine. Don't fancy it now. As he had done on numerous occasions before, he was more than capable of not doing something that he didn't want to do. So whatever was going on, whether he thought, I've paid 20 quid for this, I might as well have it, whether he thought they're all fine, I'll be fine, whether he thought it's going to be a long night, I'm going to need something to keep me going, or whether he just didn't really think at all, because in that moment it's so easy just to do something and not realise quite the risk that you're taking. And unfortunately for Dan, it was a really significant risk, because it turned out that the little bag that he had was 12 times stronger than had killed people in the past. So he was fine for a couple of hours, but then he collapsed. He was rushed off to intensive care, and he spent a couple of days on life support, and then he died from multiple organ failure. And when that happened, we realised a lot of things. One was that drugs were much closer to our door than we had thought, and if they're close to our door, then really they're close to anyone's door. We realised that drug use is much more normal than it used to be, and that's something that's increasing as well. Actually, it's something that we'll talk about. It's just not stigmatised in the way that it used to be. They're much more accessible, affordable, and alongside that, we realised that there was a real gap in the support available to schools around drugs education. But how incredibly important that is. I'm an English teacher originally, back in the day, and I'd worked in education for Croydon, actually in adult education for many years, quite broadly. And so I knew how to teach stuff, I knew how important it is to learn stuff. I didn't know all the drug stuff, but I have learnt and learnt and learnt and learnt, and read and studied and talked. And so we started a charity that's grown and grown over the last 6 years, which is fantastic, because we just want to do everything we possibly can to make sure no other young people come to harm. It's so avoidable. There are so many things that can be done, but you need to know what they are in order to know what you can do. So that's where we'll move on to the rest of what we're going to look at this evening. If you have the next slide, one of the things that it's useful to know, one of the things I'll refer to every now and then, that the government commissions a survey of schools every couple of years, and it pulls together some really, really useful data. They ask 11 to 15-year-olds lots of questions about smoking, drinking and drugs. And one of the questions they asked was, where would you go for helpful information about alcohol and drugs? And it surprises most parents to know that the first place that most parents will go for useful information about alcohol and drugs is their parents. If you could just pull that information across on the slides. Top of the list for parents, for alcohol, is parents, and then teachers, and then if you keep going on down the list, eventually you get to the other stuff that we always think is going to be there, including their friends, but their friends are quite far down. And then the same is true for drugs. For drugs, again, parents right at the top, and then teachers, and then various other places, the internet, television, and so on. So you are the most valuable resource that your children have got, whether they let on that you are or not. And so that it's so fantastic that you're here, and that you're being able to access the information. And I'll give you at the end lots more places that you can go to find out more. Okay, so what are drugs? You will know this, of course, because but it's very easy, although we all know what drugs are, to kind of not necessarily kind of think through what they do, especially for young people. How they do what they do is basically psychoactive drugs, by making changes to the way that our brain is communicating within itself, all those neurons and synapses and neurotransmitters, all those communication systems that send messages from one part of our brain to another, and then all the way around our body, psychoactive substances, just make alterations to those. So the kind of drugs that people would use recreationally, they might block them, they might mimic them, they might just change what they do. But all of that can affect the way that people feel physically and emotionally. It can affect the way that we see things. And all of that can affect the things that we choose to do. Right, I'm gonna hand over to you. If you were in a room, I would get you discussing this in groups, but you're not. But some of you may be watching this with somebody at home. But if we move on to the next slide, which is just a whole bunch of question marks, what I want you to think about is, what do you think is out there for young people? What are you aware of? One of the things we do every couple of years is, every time we go to a school and talk to year 11, 12, 13, we send out a survey ahead. And one of the things we ask is, what is it that you're aware of is around and about for your peer group? Because it's just really, really useful insight for us. The profile is generally fairly similar, but sometimes there are significant variations between schools, and then it's useful for us to get kind of an insight into what they might need to know more about than other things. And what I'm not going to show to you just yet, but in a sec, is what the overall survey from last year was. So it's more than 4,000 people who gave us, young people who gave us some feedback. What do you think might be the top 5 things on that list? And then what do you think might be further down? So if I give you maybe just 30 seconds to think amongst yourselves of what that might be, in 30 seconds time, I'll show you the slide that gives you the results. Okay. Expect you'll get the top one right. Everybody gets the top one right, mostly on the whole. A top legal one and a top illegal one. Okay, that's probably long enough because I can't sit and look at the screen for too long. Okay, next slide. Okay, top of the list is always alcohol. It's legal, it's the most widely used, most people have it in their homes. It's hardly surprising really, but a lot of young people forget that alcohol is a drug, and it's one of the most addictive substances as well that's around. Next on the list, pretty much in parallel, does change a little bit between schools, vaping, cigarettes and cannabis. Cannabis is always top of the list in terms of the illegal substances. Vaping very much overtook cigarettes. And then we get on to the other things, the pills and the powders. And, well, actually before that, we've got nitrous oxide, the little silver canisters that you see at the side of the road or maybe in parks and car parks. Ketamine, MDMA, and then we've got cocaine, LSD, Xanax, and sort of at the bottom, but nevertheless still significant and around, magic mushrooms and steroids. I was in a school just recently when magic mushrooms was coming out above cocaine and MDMA, which was interesting. Hallucinogens seem to have had a little bit of a revival, especially under lockdown, actually. So those are the things in terms of what it's useful to know about. One of the first things your children can do, and you can do as well as a parent, is just make sure that you know about the substances that are around for them. Again, at the end, I'll show you some useful websites you can go to. On the next slide, I've got a few pictures of what they might look like in case you don't know. Those are all the legal things, which of course you will know about. Alcohol, caffeine, nicotine, and then we've got cannabis. And don't forget edibles as well. Edibles are becoming increasingly popular, actually, and the more the places in the world where it's becoming legal, there's quite an industry around making edibles, and of course you can get anything online now. There was a case in the week you probably read about, a school in North London where 17 girls ended up in hospital because they've been eating sweets with cannabis in. Whether they knew or not, I don't know, but it's easy to mistake them. Then we've got a nitrous oxide, often found with balloons because it's compressed gas basically. So people would get it. Yes, there's a thing I'll show you a picture of in a bit. A cracker or charger, they call it, to get the gas out, put it in a balloon, and then it can be inhaled. And then we've got the pills and the powders, MDMA, we've got ketamine and cocaine, we've got LSD, which can look just like a little sticker, and we've also got then things like magic mushrooms, which are a little bit look a bit odd, but look like dried mushrooms. Xanax, which is a benzodiazepine, it's a very strong sedative. And steroids, which can come in different forms, pills or liquids. They can be injected or swallowed for that matter. So lots of different things in case you see things around, but also so that your children are aware of what something might be looked, if they might be being looked like, if they might be being offered it. Okay. On the next slide, I'll show you one of the things, kind of bottom line with illegal drugs, is one of the risks is that there is always an unknown risk. I mean, there are specific risks to do with all of those different substances. But with illegal drugs, with anything that they've got from an illegal source, again, you will know this, and many of them will know this, but it's so important to remember. You've got something that's been made and supplied through an incredibly messy criminal process, and it's a very careless process, and it's a process that ultimately is all about making money. It's a business. Every time it passes through a pair of hands, they're going to want to make a profit, and so they're going to stretch it out with something that's generally cheaper, and that could be something fairly benign, or it could be something incredibly risky. There are increasing numbers of very, very strong synthetic substances around. One that's most widely known about is fentanyl, which is an incredibly strong opiate, which for dealers is a great option, because you can, in terms of transporting it, you can have a load in a very, very small physical space, but also it's a cheaper option. You use a tiny, tiny bit to have a similar effect. But because it's so incredibly strong, the margin of error is tiny. But it's really important that young people know that if you're taking a substance, the only way you can know what's in it is by getting it professionally tested. This is some slides from a Vice documentary. It's High Society Truth About Ecstasy. It's worth a watch, but you can see I've just put a few screenshots from the video. It's just such a careless process. You can see the way that I mean, the equipment is not remotely clean. The way that they're measuring it is not remotely careful. The way that they're stirring it in is so random. But what comes out is a really nice little neat pill with a McDonald's logo on that anybody might think had been made in a nice, safe, clean lab, but it hasn't been. And he's talking about, in the video, he talks about consciously putting other drugs in, Xanax, cocaine, ketamine, but you wouldn't be able to know. If we look at the next slide, basically whatever it is, we just run through those things there, whether it's pills or powders, whether it's nitrous oxide, whether it's cannabis. The only way you can know, if you could just go through the pictures on there, that'd be great. And then that last picture there is a drugs organisation called The Loop, who've been testing at music festivals for the last few summers. At music festivals, there were no festivals last summer, as you know. Who knows what will happen this year? But there are always loads more drugs around at music festivals, and there are different estimates, but around half the people there, according to some surveys, are taking drugs while they're there. And young people come to harm every summer at music festivals. So the Loop have been going in and doing drug testing, because it's the only way you can know. But importantly, they don't just give information about what's in what somebody's having tested, but they have a whole conversation around that, about what that risk might look like. And actually, it's that harm reduction conversation that's the most useful part of that. But what they find is exactly as you'd expect: so many different things, really different strengths of substances, all sorts of different things mixed in. As I said, sometimes something fairly harmless, but sometimes something that's incredibly harmful. I had a really interesting afternoon with them at a festival in Dorset a couple of summers ago. Okay, there are two substances that cause young people most problems. And this is often a surprise, especially to young people, because they're two things that a lot of young people think of as fairly harmless, relatively benign, possibly not even really drugs. The first, you would probably as parents guess them, the first is alcohol, and the second is cannabis. And they're the two substances that are most widely available to young people, which is partly why they cause most problems. They're the two that most widely used, but they're the two that cause most young people to need treatment. Cannabis by far, but the second is alcohol. So if we move on to alcohol, one of the things you can do as a parent is just to make sure that your children know what a unit looks like. They may not, depending on their age, they may know this already, but even if they do, it's just a useful reminder, because spirits are incredibly important. And as you will know, there's very little spirit to your unit. something that you could do at home, again, depending on the age of your child, but it's just measure out a unit of orange juice or apple juice or something like that in the bottom of the glass, because when they're at a party, nobody's going to be measuring those units for them. If they're under 18, they're not going to be buying them in a pub or a club. So it's going to be a bottle passed around and a glass that's filled up or topped up, and it's very, very easy to lose track. Even with wine and beers, you don't get an awful lot for a unit. And if we move on, the next point is that it takes an hour for your liver to process every unit of alcohol. The other thing that's useful to know and to talk about with your children is that all the medical advice is that under the age of 15, alcohol is really just best avoided. That's Chief Medical Officer's most recent advice on the subject. Although for adults, they shouldn't have more than 14 units a week, and that should be spread out. For under 15s, it's just nothing. However, the average age of a first full drink is 13 and a bit, and the average age of first getting drunk is 14. So, I mean, it's happening, but nevertheless, it's the longer you can hold that first drink off as well, the less likely they are to develop problems with alcohol when they get older. Last point on that slide is just a little reminder. That we are, as parents, we are role models to our children. They are watching us all the time, and it's important that you just keep an eye on your own. It's so easy with alcohol for use to just kind of creep up. Tolerance levels develop very quickly, and because it's a social drug as well, it's very easy for not really quite to notice if your own alcohol use is maybe more than it should be or more than is good. But you can talk about that, and you can talk about how you manage your own decisions about alcohol, also about medicines and about other things. Those conversations are so useful. We'll come back to them in a sec. In terms of cannabis, the risks of cannabis are very different now than they were. How cannabis does what it does is basically we have a natural endocannabinoid system, and when you put cannabis into your system, the cannabinoids in cannabis they sort of overload that system a little bit, which is how they have the effect that they do. And your natural endocannabinoid system is what's responsible for learning, memory, mood, concentration, motivation, which is why when people smoke cannabis, it does kind of knock their memory a little bit to start off. And the more you do that, the more that will happen. And it does hang around for a little while as well. There are two main chemicals in cannabis. CBD, everyone's heard of now because it's all over the place. It's kind of the remedy for all sorts of things, allegedly, and genuinely for some things. And it's not illegal. You can get it in Holland and Barrett, you can get it in your coffee, you can get it all over the place, you can get it in shampoo. It's not illegal. It doesn't have a psychoactive effect, and it can reduce some of the harmful effects of the THC, which is the other main chemical in cannabis. That's what causes the psychoactive effect, and causes what you like. Can be useful when you're talking about drugs to talk in terms of welcome and unwelcome effects. And it's the same with medicines. There are things that we want them to do, but you also then kind of open the door to them doing things that we don't want them to do, which we tend to talk about as side effects. So our paracetamol, we have that to make our headache better, but if we have too much of it, it can start to damage our liver. And it's the same with anything. So with CBD, with cannabis, CBD might have some of those welcome effects, if you like, the relaxation, calm, and so on. But it's the THC that then might introduce the paranoia, the anxiety, the panic attacks. The risks with cannabis in the UK at the moment are that it's just incredibly strong. The strength of cannabis has gone up and up and up over the last few years. Over the last 20 years, if anyone was around cannabis when they were younger, it's almost a completely different product now. It's that CBD has gone down, the THC has gone up. There's a graph, a very simplistic graph that just shows how that shot up. And it's because of that strength of THC that it's doing so much harm to young people now. And it's also the age at which young people are smoking it, which is a lot younger than it used to be. Because of that, young people that start smoking in their teens, it's around 17% that will develop a dependency on cannabis. The more frequently they smoke, the more likely they are to. And because of that, 88%, it's been the same for the last 3 years, it's been 88% of young people accessing professional treatment are there because of cannabis. And there's also this really, really close connection with significant mental health problems, including psychosis. 1 in 5 new cases of psychosis are estimated to be linked to the use of cannabis, and particularly in adolescence, when our brain is going through really important changes, which we'll also look at in a sec. Before we do that, the other area of risk to young people, of course, is the legal consequences, and these can stick around even longer than the health, the mental and physical health consequences. So in terms of drugs, alcohol and the law, there are various offences. The main ones are production, possession and supply. If we focus specifically on possession, in terms of parents, there are certain risks around possession. If you find drugs on your child, in their pocket, in their bedroom, whatever, you really need to get rid of them as soon as you can. Hand them into the police, destroy them, give them into an amnesty box. Some treatment services offer these. But as long as they're in your possession, you're in possession of illegal drugs, and that could put you in a sticky situation yourself. Another risk for parents is just around allowing drug use in your home, or turning a blind eye to it as well. It's a criminal offence to allow your property or premises you own or for which you're responsible to allow drugs to be supplied, and the passing on of drugs in your home, even though you might think that it's a safer option, keep an eye on it, that's illegal. So just be very careful for yourself. In terms of supply and your children, there are risks specifically around supply, and particularly around social supply, which is basically when somebody gets the drugs in and shares them out, or shares drugs with their friend. It's really important that young people know that nothing has to change hands. No money has to change hands for that to count as supply. Drugs change hands, no money changes hands, it still counts as supply. This is a story from a couple of years ago. The girl wasn't a dealer at all, she was just the one in the friendship group that happened to be the one that bought the drugs for the group. And it happens all the time. And it's a really easy mistake to make. It was about 59% of 11 to 15-year-olds who had got drugs had got them from a friend. And of course, there are other risks as well. There are all sorts of risks around the way that drugs can affect people's behaviour, which might mean that they end up hurting somebody, breach of the peace, damaging property, all the stuff around drinking and drug driving. And of course, there can be really long-term consequences from that in terms of countries they're never going to get to go to. They have to declare it on a UCAS form. If they have to have a DBS check for various jobs, a drug offence will show up on that. So just really important to be aware of possible legal consequences as well. Right, just a little reminder before I move on to the next bit. Do put some questions in the chat if you have any, or in the Q&A. I can't remember where they said they're going to go, but you will have remembered. Right, so that's my reminder slide, is the next one. Thank you. And then I'm going to move on to thinking about decision making. There is always a reason for everything we do. Sometimes we need to do a lot of digging around to find out what that reason is, but there is always a reason somewhere, and it's really important for young people to hold on to that, because sometimes we can do things with that. We often do, whatever age we are, we can do things without really thinking about why we did it. But the more they can shine a spotlight on their own and other people's motivation for doing the things they do, the more they can really weigh that up and kind of take control of the choices that they make. Right, I've got a question for you, which is from the school survey data. So if we could have the next slide. What percentage do you think of 15-year-olds said that they had been offered illegal drugs? And what percentage do you think had tried them? Is that going to come up on the slide? Fab. And what percentage do you think had tried them? Right, 10 seconds, what do you think? Talk amongst yourself if you're with someone at home. 15-year-olds, they were in year 11, but just at the beginning of year 11. Offered and tried. Okay, so for 11-year-olds, at year 7, 16% said they'd been offered illegal drugs. 9% had said they tried them. So it's about 1 in 10, and 2% in the last month. With 15-year-olds, that goes up to 59%, as I said. Oh, no, it wasn't how I said. 59% have been offered illegal drugs, 38% have tried them, and 19% in the last month. So that's an awful lot, and that's gone up and up and up. A little table that shows you how that's gone up over the last three surveys over the last 4 years. When we started doing this in 2014, it was about 50-50, 49% who'd been offered something, 1 in 4 had tried something. That's really shot up. Where they got them from, is 57%. Sorry, I was wrong when I said it was 59% got them from a friend. 57%, though, that's really significant. And those friends were committing a criminal offence without realising. 11% was from a dealer. Where they got them, or where they got them and where they probably used them as well. 44% was kind of round and about, young people's kind of natural environment and so on. 17% was in someone else's house. That might be someone else's house, might be your house. It might not be your child, but it could be someone around your house. 12% was at school. 6% on the internet, and I've got growing concerns. I've been doing a campaign over the summer. I put in a slide about it here, but I did some work with BBC over the last year about the risks to young people of drugs on social media. There's a documentary that I was involved in called Dealers in Your DMs. It's on iPlayer. It just came out in August, but have a look at that. It's growing concern. Okay. In terms of thinking about motivation, one of the questions that the survey asks is, why did you take drugs for the first time? And you can see on this table that there are lots of different reasons. As you would guess, across all ages, the biggest reason is just curiosity. What would it be like? There's also for the effect of it, and that's the next biggest reason for most age groups. Because my friends don't ask about peer pressure, but that's a really big factor. If I ask parents or young people what's the biggest reason, most of them will say peer pressure. But a real concern is the number that are taking drugs because they wanted to forget their problems. Even with 12-year-olds, it's about 1 in 5 that said they took drugs for the first time because they wanted to forget their problems. What's going on? Why is that so difficult? The reason is stuff that's going on in the teenage brain, and there are three kind of significant factors. There are so many changes going on in adolescence. What you need your brain to do when you're 10, what you need it to do when you're 25 are quite different things. And over that 15-year spell, there are lots and lots of things going on. Lots of things are being strengthened, lots of things are being pruned away, and your brain is sort of being rewired, really, and it does it sort of from the back to the front. So the very, very last bit to develop is your prefrontal cortex, which is the bit just behind your forehead. So that's kind of lagging behind, but whizzing in front is your limbic system, which is sometimes referred to as the feeling and reacting brain. And some of the factors that are to do with the limbic system that relate to risk taking, if we could just pull those down, lovely. Because of that, when you're in your adolescence, the reward centers in your brain experience pleasure so incredibly intensely. And when something's really positive, those reward pathways are strengthened. And that can lead to doing things that cause pleasure much, much more, because we've registered that as something that's good to do. And we get a huge reward in adolescence from taking risks. Unfortunately, risk and reward are really, really closely linked together. And actually, even an anticipation of taking a risk can give them a massive, massive buzz. They're much more likely to take risky decisions when emotions are running high. So when, I don't know, it could be when everyone's really excited and happy, or it could be if they're feeling under pressure. But if they know that's the case, thinking about decisions, situations where emotions might be running high, and being aware that they might be more likely to take risks can be useful. In terms of the prefrontal cortex, which can be called the thinking brain, it's kind of where all our sensible stuff is lodged, that all those executive functions. Because it takes that bit longer to access it in your adolescence, it just takes that bit longer to think through what the consequences might be from the decisions that are being made. It also means it's much harder to learn from mistakes, because that's the bit of your brain where you remember the things that went wrong. You remember the things that went right because you've got this massive buzz from it and your reward centers are all strong and everything. But the bits that go wrong are harder to remember and harder to recall. The carrot is much more effective than a stick in adolescence. And sometimes young people might need their parents to help them remember, this didn't work so well last time, maybe it won't again. And then, of course, you've got the role of your peers in your adolescence. And there are various factors at work there. If you could just pull those down, that would be great. There's this natural quest for independence. So, of course, there's this kind of evolutionary developmental factor, which is a really powerful thing and really important, that they have to know that they can survive outside the safety of that family structure. They'll always be part of the family, but they're becoming independent adults, and they need to know they can survive in a different relationship with their parents. And so there's that process of change, which can be incredibly painful. It can just be a bit bumpy, but it can be difficult on both sides. But that's really important. They need to know that they are safe with and can survive with their peers, which is one of the reasons why their friends are so important. But there's also this heightened sensitivity in adolescence to do with the way your brain is developing, to do with social reward. And because of that, there's this social risk factor. There's that hypersensitivity in your adolescence to what people think about you. Sarah Jane Blakemore, I put a few books down the side there. They're all really, really useful and interesting. But Sarah Jane Blakemore, she's done a really good TED talk as well, if you haven't got time to read a book. She talks about the social risk factor and how in your adolescence there are huge risks around not being okay with the people around you, and teenagers can literally be weighing up the known risk of a substance against the possible risk of not being okay with the people around them, falling out with those friends, not being asked along again. With basically the biggest, the optimum age for risk taking is 13 to 16 years. There are various different studies. I was just reading Sarah Jane Blakemore this morning, actually. 14.38 years, I think she pulls out of some research that she did. So again, if they can be aware of that, and as a parent you could be aware of that, just to know that during that time they may need to take extra time just to make those decisions safely. What they need to do is if they're in situations where there's risk, to take their time. Going on just a little bit to dip back into Dan's story, with Dan, there was a whole, if we could have the next slide, just another picture of Dan. There was a friend, as there often is, that's just Dan, some of his friends, a friend that played a particularly significant role, who didn't mean him to come to any harm, but nevertheless did, had got very involved in drugs over the previous summer, cocaine and MDMA particularly, lots and lots of messages in the few months that led up to Dan and his last drug decision. And it turned out that whereas we thought this was the first time he'd taken anything, it was the third time. First time she'd given him a little bit of hers to try at a gig, and another gig a month or so later, and this hadn't been a good experience for Dan. She'd got him another friend, some of their own from her dealer. And when it came to this rave, which was a couple of months later, he's coming out with a whole load of excuses, but she really wants him to go and works very hard over about 40 minutes to persuade him. And of course she didn't mean him to come to any harm, but left to his own devices, he would probably have stayed at home and still been in bed. And he was being very wary through the whole thing. Dan was more than capable of saying no, and she didn't mean him to come to any harm, and all this time on still feels so awful, guilty about the whole thing, and probably will for the rest of her life. It's so easy in your adolescence to be on both sides of that conversation, and for it, and it's always possible that may go wrong. I talk about the frog and the boiling water thing for the sneak preview of that, just because it's got a useful illustration. If you've got a frog and you put it in a pan of boiling water, it'll jump straight out. But you've got a frog and you put it in a pan of cold water and bring it to the boil, and it doesn't realise it ends up a boiled frog. And it can be so like that with friendship groups. It's those little changes around you that can make something normal that was never normal, and okay that was never okay. Dan had always been really anti-drugs for his own good reasons. But those little changes can mean that something, it becomes okay. Just be really vigilant. Some strategies that are useful for them to hold on to manage peer influence. First one that's really important to emphasize. I've talked about the numbers going up in terms of young people being using drugs and being offered drugs, but it's really important to emphasize always that whatever age they are, the majority of young people aren't drinking too much or taking drugs. The more normal any of us think anything is, the more likely we are to do it. So some useful tips. One is plan ahead. They are very likely to be in a situation where they have to make a decision. So think ahead, what will their answer be? Apparently, as long as we're programmed to respect a reason, if we've got a reason and say it with confidence, we can get away with an awful lot. They can think, you can talk that through with them, think through some scenarios. Another tip is to take their time, think through those consequences. They are statistically, in your adolescence, you're much more likely to take risks if you're with your friends, because of this adolescent brain stuff, than if you're on your own. Keep that question in their heads. Would they do it if they were on their own? Next tip, have a toolkit of excuses. Different things will work on different occasions, or ways to get out of situations or groups where they feel there might be pressure. Next tip, try to think about where that pressure is coming from and why, because it might just be in their own head. There can be a real emperor's new clothes thing going on with drugs and young people. Everyone in a group might think everyone else is really up for it. And it's really important to remember that their friends may not show it, but they will, generally speaking, especially if they're good friends, they'll respect them more for sticking to their guns and being really clear about what they do and don't want to do. And the last thing to hold on to really is just to remember that they're surrounded by other people that are feeling very insecure and unsure of themselves, however confident they might seem. They're also not thinking through consequences. They're also not managing risk terribly well. All of those are useful things. They're probably all things you've talked about already, but they're useful things for your children to know. Right, my last section, just a last reminder to put any questions that you might have in the chat. And I've got about 5 more minutes to go through, and then I've got 5 minutes, 10 minutes or so to go through any questions. Right, the last thing I'm going to think about is having those conversations and some practical strategies that you can put in place. One of our youth ambassadors, we've got youth ambassadors who are fantastic, they're our best resource really, but she talked about making drugs a comfortable conversation in your family, and that was just such a lovely phrase that we use it all the time now. And the more you can do that, the more it means that that's a conversation that both you and your teenagers can come back to, because it can be just as awkward for them as it is for their parents to launch into a conversation about drugs as and when they need to. So in terms of those kind of general preventative conversations, start early if you can. We saw how many 11-year-olds had been offered illegal drugs. They're around about and they're aware of things, even if they haven't been around them directly. So start early, that makes it more comfortable. And also really important, don't feel you've got to be an expert. Do find stuff out, but don't feel you can have that conversation until you know absolutely everything. Also, really important, but very obvious, find a good time and place. Maybe when they're dashing off to a party isn't the best time and place, or when they've just got in from school and they're really tired and stressed. And also, when's a good time for you? They can take opportunities. There's often something in the news or something on television. You can take opportunities as they arise, but also think of when would be a good time to make an opportunity. Is there something you can watch together? Is there something that you could bring into the conversation? When would be a good space be? Next, yeah, thank you. Be open and keep listening is really important. Really important to keep that conversation open, really important to listen as much as you talk in all of these difficult conversations we have. Right, next point. Being clear and consistent is really important. There's been a lot of research done to show that the more teenagers have really clear boundaries, and the more they are applied consistently. Obviously, they have to be open to negotiation and flexibility as they grow older. But it's really important that everybody's clear about them. The more clear boundaries that young people have, the less likely they are to engage in risky behaviour. It's a very good preventative measure. Right. Really important, don't feel you've got to get it all out in one go. It's an ongoing conversation, something you need to come back to. And be prepared for tricky questions. You might get a "so mum, have you ever?" or "so dad, have you ever?" Think about how you frame that and answer it, and what the reason behind it is. It's important to be honest. It's also need to be careful about normalizing something. So think about how you frame it and how different, for example, cannabis is now. If cannabis was something that maybe you did do when you were younger, so much stronger. You were probably older than your teenagers are. And if it all goes horribly wrong, don't give up. It's too important. Okay, one of the things that's useful to talk about is harm reduction advice. It's a difficult one for parents, but it's really, really important, especially with older teens, because they may well be around stuff. They may find themselves saying yes to something. And if they do, that's not the last decision they have to make. In order to get to go home safely, there are a lot of other decisions that need to be made in order to reduce the risk that they're taking. But it's really valuable to frame that conversation in terms of if they're with a friend, because they may well be the friend that's got the sensible head that's looking out for everybody, but it also is a kind of sideways into that conversation without saying, if you're doing drugs, this is what you can do to reduce the risk, but making sure they have got that information. Of course, the only way that you can make drug-related risk zero is not to take drugs at all, and that's a really important point to make. But nevertheless, if they are with someone that's taking drugs, it's really important that they make sure they know stuff. It's really important that they stick together and that they look out for their friends and that they check in with them. They may look okay, but they might be starting to feel a bit weird. It's really important that they remember not to mix stuff, especially alcohol. It's the easiest thing in the world if you've had a drink or two to take other risks, but also that they remember that they're basically testing it on themselves. So it's so important they don't jump in with a whole pill or a whole bag of powder. Take it easy is all the basic harm reduction. Remember too about drink spiking, and remember those units. Stuff about food and water depends on different substances, so that's where there's some individual harm reduction advice. I'll go through some stuff for you. Really important to be in a good space in your head and in your body. If you're under the weather or in a feeling really low or anxious, drugs are only going to make things worse. And really, really important point to emphasize to your children is if they need help, get it. Just call 999. A lot of young people worry about getting in trouble or getting someone else in trouble, but they really, really won't. Okay, a couple of really practical strategies that relate to their phones, which they will always have with them. One thing they can do is just to, if we just have the next slide, one thing is just to make sure they've got their in case of emergency details on there. If anything goes wrong, you get a phone call straight away. Another thing is have an escape plan. Put a plan together so that if anything goes wrong, they've got a way out of it. If something starts to feel uncomfortable, they can get themselves home without having to make awkward excuses or explanations, which can be really difficult. So all you've got to do is have a secret code. It can be anything. This guy in America, he calls it the X plan. His kids would text him X. Agree the response. You can just ring them. You don't have to say anything. What will their excuse be? What will they say? It could just be, that's my dad. I don't know what it is. I've got to get home now. What you have to do, though, to make it work is you've got to promise you're not going to ask any questions. Otherwise, they'll think twice. So those are a couple of practical things that they can do. In terms of how you can tell if your child is using drugs, just quickly before we finish, I'll whiz through this last bit, but there are 4 basic ways. First is they might tell you. That's the most obvious way. Someone else might tell you. You might see some signs of drug use, and I'll have a quick look at what some of those might be. You might see the after effects. You might see drugs or drugs paraphernalia around, and I put a few pictures of some of the different things you might see there. Those little bags, that's a cracker to get stuff out of nitrous oxide. You've got some cannabis bits and pieces there. Those little LSD tabs and vapes, which come in all sorts of different shapes and forms. If you've got concerns, there are various things you might be able to look at. There are sort of phases of substance use, sorry. First might be occasional use. They might just be one amongst many activities, a dip in and a dip out. And for most young people, that's where it will start and finish. For some, it might become more regular, and they might be starting to, maybe it's just something that their social group always does, and that might start to become problematic, although they probably still can carry on doing most of the stuff that they do, and then that might develop into dependency. It's not a path, it's not inevitable. If they take something once, it doesn't mean they're going to end up addicted to it. But it can be a journey that where some people end up, and that's very often when they might need help, and reducing and stopping use become very difficult. Some of the signs of use that you might look out for, there are various social changes. I'll just whiz through these. Some things that you might see in terms of their behaviour. There might be changes to their friendship group. They might be talking about drugs on social media. There might be too much money, too little money. There might be changes that are physical, that pupil dilation, red eye that you can get from smoking cannabis. Might be unexpected changes to their weight or built, funny smells that you're not sure about. There can be behavioural changes. There can be stuff they might be struggling at school, not turning up late, not turning up at all, unpredictable behaviour, self-harm. Some of those are perfectly normal teenage behaviour, so don't panic if you see any of them. But they can be signs of drug use as well, and worth a conversation. So that conversation is a little bit more difficult. If you suspect or know that your child is using drugs, then check the basis of your suspicions, because it could be something else altogether. If you've got concerns, there may be something to be concerned about, but it could be something else. So do a bit of sounding out first. Act as a team. If you've got another half, it's really good to stand together in this. It can be a difficult journey, but one that you need to kind of be in together. Ask your child about it. They may deny it, they may slam a door, and it may take time for them to be able to talk about it if they can, but they may actually be quite relieved, because if you've noticed it, it could be that it's getting something that they are aware is also getting out of hand. Okay, really hard, but try not to panic, try not to interrogate, try not to make accusations, jump to conclusions, try to be really open as much as you can and just keep listening, keep that conversation open. We can have the next one. And try to understand why they might be using drugs. Right, next one, where have we got to? Really important that you talk harm reduction, especially if you know they're not ready to stop using whatever they're using. If you know that they are taking something really, really important, that you know, that they know how the risks they're taking can be reduced, and do talk to other people and get professional help if you think you might need it. And there are some organisations there. Frank, you can find a local treatment service. Drug Fam and AdFam, they're both charities that offer support to families who've got issues with drugs and alcohol, and you can find professional help through them as well. Just really quickly, quickly whiz through these last two slides. These are places you can go for more support. Frank Drug Science, lots of information about drugs, the Loop Advice, and Drugs and Me, there's harm reduction information there. Say Why to Drugs, really interesting podcasts. Drink Aware and Alcohol Education Trust, lots of useful information, including information for parents and some useful advice too. And then we've got some kind of maybe more broader information. There's the Mix and Rise Above have got lots and lots of different information. Rise Above is for 11 to 16-year-olds, that's Public Health England, as is Frank. The Mix has got lots of information for up to 25s. Teen Tips, lots of stuff for parents of teenagers, but also for teenagers themselves. Lots of podcasts on there, lots of things going on that site. And it just goes a health app designed by young people for young people. And then we've got Festival Safe, as and when festivals come back, and we've got Young Minds as well, which is I've just posted that on our Facebook page actually, because it's a really useful resource for parents there, as well as for young people. And there's a helpline that you can call if you need it. It's National Mental Health Day today, which may have been flagged up in the rest of the conference already. But the links between drugs and alcohol and mental health are complicated but fairly well established. So really, really important to get help if you need it. Right, I don't know if there are any questions. I can have a look actually, because I can see the chat here. Parents are definitely the first line of defence for their children. It's so important. Question about any tips to help teenagers deal with a lack of self-confidence. It's a hard one, because it's difficult. It's a time of life when it's difficult to feel confident about yourself anyway. I think probably most of us will look back to adolescence and be thankful that we're not still there. Focusing on things that they're good at is a useful tip. Thinking about things that you can do together that are very affirming. Things that lots and lots of praise and encouragement. Get the school on board as well. Find ways that they can get involved in activities at school that will really boost their confidence. Have a look on Young Minds and the Mix as well, because there are some really useful resources on there. There's a question here: is it possible that parents can take pressure off children to avoid them from falling into the temptation to escape? I assume that means that escaping as in using drugs and alcohol to cope with problems. I've got a message that the headmaster would like to join in answering this question live. I think that's what that means. Basically, if there are, hello, did you want to join in with that one?
Okay. Is this the question about taking pressure off children to avoid them?
To avoid the temptation to escape. So I was just saying, I assume that's to do with escaping problems, which is a concern, because drugs and alcohol are a way that adults and young people can do that. Finding lots of other strategies is the best way, really. I'm sure that was that what you were going to say as well.
Yeah, I agree, and I think alternative activities. I think getting developing other interests and getting children to use time well. I think that all helps as well.
Yes, and working with the school, you're very lucky parents to have such a lovely school to send your children to, because it's such an incredibly supportive community, and working together is the best way always, working in partnership between parents and schools to help young people, and access some of those resources online as well. But there are so many ways to avoid that, and the more that can be avoided, the better, because it can sometimes seem like an easy strategy, but it really isn't. It doesn't fix any problems, and it introduces a lot of other problems. And actually, in terms of the motivation to use substances, it's the one that can lead to most lasting problems as well, because it becomes the coping strategy, and there are then, it's harder to find other ones, because that's the one that's the first line of coping. Okay, I had one last slide of some things that you can do next. I feel I should confess as well and apologise, because I got my hours completely wrong, and consequently I should be at the school moving my own slides on perfectly competently. But huge thanks to the very good people back at the Cedars. I'm sitting in my own home because I completely ran out of time to get to the school once I realised I was an hour behind myself. So thank you so much for moving them on. So I'm sorry for any clumsiness in terms of moving things. It was entirely my fault. So what can you do next? One is stay in touch if you'd like to. Contact us on the website. Also, you can follow us on social media. I use Facebook a lot as a kind of front line of information for anything that comes up in terms of young people and drugs and alcohol. And we've been doing Facebook live sessions. There's a whole load of videos on there as well, Asha, our drugs educator, and me. Another thing you can do is look out for my book. This is the reason why I got my hours wrong, because I've been writing all day. I've got a publishing deadline, not publishing, I've got to have my first draft of my last chapter in by a week on Tuesday. So I've been writing hard all day. I'm writing a book for parents, which is basically a parents' workshop in a book. So there's a whole load more information in there that I can never race through in an hour. It's going to be called I Wish I Known. It's going to be published by Hodder and Stoughton next May. So look out for that. And the other thing is, if you would like to, we are a small charity with part doing lots and lots of work, and doing it for nothing in most places, because most of the schools we work with are state schools who don't have any budgets for this sort of thing. So if anybody would like to join us and help us do more of what we do please feel free to make a donation, become a regular donor, do a fundraising activity, run a marathon, or whatever. There's a couple of numbers there that you can text, or just contact us on the website. There's a donate button there as well. So that's me. Thank you so much again for inviting me in to speak to you. I'm really sorry for all my